Hatchings are distinctive and systematic patterns of lines and dots used for designating heraldic tinctures or other colors on uncolored surfaces, such as woodcuts or engravings, seals and coins. Several systems of hatchings were developed during the Renaissance as an alternative to tricking, the earlier method of indicating heraldic tinctures by use of written abbreviations. The present-day hatching system was developed during the 1630s by Silvester, Petra, Sancta and Marcus Vulson de la Colombière. Some earlier hatching methods were also developed, but did not come into wide use. Origins: hatching developed as a method of screening used by Renaissance painters. For copperplate engravers and artists such as Zangre and Francourt, it served as a natural method to designate heraldic tinctures. Copperplate engravers faced difficulties producing colored illustrations. The first tests of color copperplate engravings were done by François Perrier around the middle of the 17th century. According to some views, however, multicolored copperplate engravings were invented by Abraham, as described in his 1645 treatise. Heralds did not like hatching, and the College of Arms gave preference to tricking even beyond the 17th century. Tricking was a simpler and quicker way than hatching to designate the tinctures. Otto Titan van Hefner maintained that the first traces of hatching on the woodcuts began during the 15th and 16th centuries. Both tricking and hatching were applied by the Benedictine monk, philologist and historian Vincenzo Beguini. He drew a difference between metals and colors of arms on his woodcuts by leaving the places for metals blank. Similarly, all colors were hatched the same way the color vert is today. Besides this, tinctures were designated in the fields and on the ordinaries and charges by tricking. A for rosso, A for azure, N for negro, G for giallo, and B for bianco. Vert was not represent among his works. Painting and graphics advanced greatly in the Low Countries during the 15th–18th centuries. For this reason, different hatching methods emerged in the system of heraldry in these territories, such as the methods of Zangre, Francourt, Vulson, and Iraq. The four other authors to produce hatching systems in the 17th century, de la Colombière, Petra, Sancta, Gelenius, and Lockwood's, also had close connection with heraldists and artists in these territories. The earliest hatching system was developed by Baptiste Zangre, a copperplate engraver, publisher, typographer and bookseller from Leuven. In 1600, the hatching systems of Petra, Sancta and de la Colombière differed from Zangreus's method only in the hatchings of the color sable. Dispute of Petra, Sancta and de la Colombière. The primacy of developing a hatching method belongs undoubtedly to Zangreus. In comparison to his system, Petra, Sancta and de la Colombière made only minor changes to Zangreus' system, such as different hatching for the color sable. It seems that de la Colombière preceded Petra, Sancta, and the armorial chart of Zangreus published in French could possibly be known to him pretty well. The artists from the Spanish Low Countries, that is to say from the neighboring territories to France, visited Paris very often. We have only some fragmental data about the life of Marcus Vulson de la Colombière. He visited Paris in 1618, but by all probability, until 1635 he was staying in Grenoble as he was a royal councillor in the Dauphiné Parliament. He also published a book in the spirit of the Gallicanism in Geneva that year. Colombière's ideas suited the king's taste too. As a result, he departed Grenoble and settled in Paris, where he devoted his entire energy to study heraldry. His next book was published in Paris in 1638. He had wide-ranging correspondence with the most renowned heraldists of his time. For this reason, it could perhaps be concluded that de la Colombière was right in claiming the title of the inventor of the hatching system, and accusing Petra Sancta of copying his method and incorrectly publishing it in his 1638 work. 1 year before, the same hatching system was published by de la Colombière. However, the earlier book of Petra Sancta from 1634 had a hatching table as well. On page 37 of his title A Science Hero, Colombière maintains that Petra Sancta simply copied his system without any changes. De la Colombière also mentions the book publishers and copperplate engravers as the users of the hatching system. Otfried Neubeck maintains that the hatching system in heraldry was invented by de la Colombière and not Petra Sancta, who only popularized the system through his second treatise titled Tesserae Gentilitia, published in 1638. On the other hand, it's also true that Silvester Petra Sancta provided, though preliminary, comprehensive studies on his heraldic work in Germany and the Netherlands, and that it's very likely that he was acquainted with the idea of hatching and the earlier existing hatching methods from the Dutch engravers before he developed his own hatching system. He was the confessor of the Cardinal Pier Luigi Carafa between 1624 and 1634. Petra Sancta stayed with his lord in Cologne, where he fought against the rising Protestantism through his sermons and religious discussions, including through two of his emblematic books published in 1634 and 1638, respectively. Later he settled down in Rome and published his famous treatise on heraldry there, but during the late 1620s and the early 1630s he stayed in the Spanish Low Countries and the neighboring territories. In 1634 he published his first book touching the topic of heraldry, containing a hatching table, and his main heraldic work with a coherent hatching system was published in 1638 in Rome. Contribution of engravers to development. According to the data from the Plantin Moretus archive, the emblems of Petra Sancta's 1634 book were prepared by artist engravers in the service of the Jesuit monks first, and then between December 1631 and June 1634 it was redone by André Pauwels for Baptiste Moretus. The allegorical title page of this book was prepared by Rubens. Petra Sancta's 1638 book was published by Francesco Corbelletti in Rome. The woodcuts from one of the publications of Corbelletti dated 1627 are good examples of stripping applied for screening. One of the woodcuts in the book shows even a kind of a screening with hatching. Moreover, the arms on the title page of one of the Corbelletti's 1639 publications already represents a complete example of heraldic hatching. That means Corbelletti took over the heraldic hatching system already in the next year after the 1638 system of Petra Sancta appeared. If we consider the time needed to prepare the engravings and the approval by the censor, Corbelletti must know the hatching system of Petra Sancta even before 1638. Thus it's obvious that Petra Sancta got the model for his heraldic hatching system from the illustrators and publishers of his books in the Low Countries. It is possible that these engravers also knew at least two earlier hatching systems by Zangre in 1600, and Francois in 1623. The techniques of heraldic hatching might have even been carried forward by the guilds of engravers one after another. Certainly, Petra Sancta must have at least held consultations with the engravers who were preparing illustrations for his books to explain to them his concept, or to develop a coherent method to designate tinctures by mutual agreement. Designation of tinctures by hatching needs copperplate engravings, as the tiny places of the escutcheons need lines close to each other, which is impossible to be realized by using woodcuts, and copperplate engraving was the most developed form of hatching in the Low Countries, especially in Antwerp. while until the 1630s it was almost unknown in some other countries, including Paris. So, the heraldic hatching was developed as a result of the cooperation between heraldists and copperplate engravers and artists. Other hatching systems. The French heraldist Imbert de la Fillec and his Italian counterpart Goffredo di Crolanza claimed that the work of Philippe de la Raspinoy was the first one that adopted the hatching system applied in the blazon. His two-volume book was published in Douai in 1631 and in 1632 respectively. This city, now in France, was then part of Flanders. The illustrations in this book include 1,121 escutcheons, standards and seals of armorial bearings, on wood, besides 58 copperplate illustrations that at first sight appear to have hatchings. If one, however, compares these hatchings with the descriptions, then one finds out that there isn't any system in it at all. For instance, gules is alternately indicated by horizontal or vertical or diagonal lines or is left blank. It seems La Raspinoy considered lines and dots merely as a sort of artistic additions which he put in at random. There is no hatching table at all. Most other known hatching systems also originated in the Low Countries. The tiny hatching table of the above-mentioned Jacob Francois, to be found in his Pompa Funebri Alberti Pii Austriaci, was the earliest hatching method after Zangre. The Cistercian abbot from Antwerp and historian and genealogist Christoph Butkins also developed his own system, but it was used by him in an inconsequent way which led to the misunderstandings and the resultant sudden disappearance of this system. The hatching table of Thomas de Ruck was radically different from that of Zangre's. Egidius Gelenius was one of the most respected Cologne historians of his time. He developed a late hatching system, but it did not gain popularity. Gelenius was deeply influenced by Petra Sancta, and both the men met personally several times in Cologne. Gelenius also studied the coats of arms and antiquities of the Rhenish nobility in the territory neighboring the Low Countries. However, Gelenius's hatching system is identical only at 2 points with Petra Sancta, indicating that he consciously tried to develop an independent system but failed to make a serious cut. Or it can also indicate that Petra Sancta's system was not yet fully developed when they met in Cologne. If this is true, it makes certain the primacy of de la Colombière as the inventor of the hatching system. The last hatching method was developed by Charles Séguin, a French heraldist and royal historian, in 1654. His system is similar to the method of Petra Sancta. On the table X of his work, Otto Titan van Hefner published still another system of hatching from 1639, attributed to Lockwood's. His book, titled Philippus Prudens, contains as many as 27 engraved portraits of the Portuguese kings, among them several with hatched coat of arms. But there is no hatching table at all. However, in his earlier book from 1636 we can really find a hatching table. In 1632 Lockwood's was sent to the Low Countries, where he became a renowned preacher and missionary. His first book, Steganographia ars Orthographia, was published in 1636 in Brussels when he was a professor at the Leuven University, the same city, where Jan Baptiste Zangrius was also active. Here Lockwood's published a major work titled Theologia Moralis ad Prima e Clarissima Principia Reducta, printed by Pras Zangrius. His book titled Philippus Prudens, containing some hatched arms, was published in 1639 by Balthasar Maretus in Antwerp. The coats of arms were engraved by Cornelius Gall the Younger, after the drawings of Erasmus Quirinus the Younger, a Flemish Baroque painter, and the engraving of the frontispiece was made by Jacob Neefs, also after a design by Erasmus Quirinus the Younger. Christoffel Planten, grandfather of Balthasar Meritis, set up his printing shop called De Gulden Passer in Antwerp in 1555, publishing both Catholic and Protestant literature. This Frenchman, who fled his native country to Antwerp to escape the persecution during the 1540s, was the best-known printer of his time. Meritis was also a close friend to Rubens, who made several illustrations for the company's publications. This company also published a work by Justus Lipsius in 1604 using the same portrait of Lipsius that was engraved by Zangre in 1601. Zangre had also some Parisian connections. The Parisian Book Society knew several representatives of a number of leading engravers originating from the Netherlands. For instance, the famous Jodocus Badius from ASSE, and the not-so-famous Johannes Lodewicus Stiletnus from TL. He started off as a corrector at Badius, married the sister-in-law of Badius's daughter Madeleine, and became an uncle to Petra Zangreus. Additional tinctures. Out of these systems, Otto Titan van Hefner published some further hatching methods at Table X of his above-cited book, presenting hatching methods for some additional tinctures as well. Some additional tinctures already appeared in the theory of heraldry in the early 15th century, which were then soon applied in practice. The German jurist and heraldist Eucharius Gottlieb Rink introduced hatching for the grey and proper. These hatchings were presented by Gatter as well. He maintained that the first one is needless, but the second one has its own importance, because he had noticed himself that old armorials produced by heralds, at least in Germany, also made difference between iron color and the white color when they omit the term argent. He also recommended to study the work by Johann David Kohler titled Programma de Auctoribus Incisiarum to learn about the origin of hatchings. The German heraldist Christian Samuel Theodor Bernd introduced hatching for some other tinctures such as Umbra, Rotgelb, Stahlblau and Bluthfarbe. Besides the traditional metals, ore and argent, some other metals like copper, lead, bronze, etc., also emerged over the years. Hatching for iron and steel were introduced by two Italian heraldists, Guelfi Camaini and Goffredo di Crolanza, but these were rarely used. The heraldic furs do not need a special hatching method, as they have a special pattern that is easily recognizable even on the uncolored illustrations. Nevertheless, there existed two heraldic furs that had their own hatchings. Also, there are in use furs like zibeline and marten. The color and hatching for zibeline is the same as the sable tincture, and the color and hatching of marten is identical with the gules tincture. So, in some countries these tinctures are also held as furs. Zibeline was already used in the ancient times of heraldry. Some Minnesangers applied the word Zobelfell for the black tincture, and the arms of the Count von Zollern also contained zibeline. The color and hatching of marten is identical with the red tincture. The origin of the word gules is from the medieval Latin word gula, which means the mouth of a carnivorous animal, and in some cases the gules are made of the marten fur. Maybe its reddish tint came to the heraldry from the fur of pine marten. In the poem of Conrad von Wurzburg we can read Kellenrot transformed into modern German as Pelsrot, which is Hermelinweiss and Zobel as well, though the Webster's Dictionary defines the meaning of pine as a white, yellowish timber, and the Cambridge International Dictionary defines it as a timber usually pale in color. No source, including heraldry textbooks, mentions it in connection with heraldry. Other modern usages. The basic Petra Sancta system was adopted in the modern world by industrial engineers as a standard system of colors and hatch patterns for use in planning factories and material handling systems.